Hello, it's my pleasure to introduce to you today an amazing leader and good friend of mine. And his name is Howard Hatcher of Leaders Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And he's also the founder of Color Free America and the Joseph Effect. And you're in for a real treat here as we talk about leadership principles. And as I always say, the purpose of this podcast is to highlight great leaders in the culture like Dr. Howard and find out what they're doing, learn from that wisdom that they've gained on their journey, and then share that with the rest of us. So, Dr. Howard, there's so many things that we could talk about here today. Maybe you could talk about your church or some of the organizations that you're linked. We just want to glean some leadership wisdom from you.
Thanks, Jerry, for having me. Let's basically start with the church. We're in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I pastor Leaders Church, and we also have the Joseph Effect. The Joseph Effect deals with the comprehensive accelerated learning. So we want to stimulate cognitive learning where it's intentional and just create some neuron firing that creates pathways that produce more effective outcomes as a person and more effective outcomes in life. So basically, we just want to put your brain on steroids so that you can grow optimally and you can also be a generational leader to your family. So we deal with leadership principles through our church and through the Joseph Effect, and we work with law enforcement. We do mental health training and leadership development for law enforcement, and we're in our third year of contract with law enforcement for leadership development and mental health. And we put together those curriculums for both.
So what do you think is the purposeful outcome of those programs that you've been working closely with law enforcement on?
Well, the purposeful outcome is to help manage the default leadership position that law enforcement is in. It's kind of like when you take a job as a surgeon at a hospital. By default, you become a community leader. You become recognized as a thought leader and as a social or civic leader by the community because of that position. It's the same way with law enforcement. And what we found out is that law enforcement, they are what I call their vocational leads. In their vocation of their lead. So that when you walk into an elevator and someone's wearing a uniform, by default, immediately you have a perception about law enforcement because of the uniform. So the uniform itself is a force multiplier. It multiplies the force and the impact of their presence. The average person walks into an elevator and you don't have the number of thoughts about their position and role in society as when a law enforcement officer walks into an elevator. So the uniform speaks and communicates a level of impact on your soul and on your mind in a way that someone else's doesn't. Now,
So you're saying that just the presence or the visual interaction can influence leadership even before a single word is spoken.
absolutely. So that's default leadership inherent in the vocation. So every vocation, and especially every prominent vocation, has default leadership built into it. A marriage, a home, has default leadership built into it because when a decision needs to be made on behalf of the family, then you're going to look to the husband and the wife. You're not going to go ask the 5-year-old. Your position in the family speaks to your leadership role and responsibility in the family. And so it's the same way we found with law enforcement. There are force multipliers embedded in every vocation. And if you can identify the leadership principles associated with that vocation, then you can begin to pull that apart, extrapolate, put it back together, and then help them understand those principles. And then you reinforce those principles so that they begin to do on purpose what others do by accident. And that's really part of the core competencies, core internal competencies that you must own in leadership. For example, are there any other force multipliers that a law enforcement officer possesses? Now, what we found is the answer yes. You've got a gun on your side. That's another force multiplier. People want to see, is this a security guard that doesn't carry a gun, Or is this a guard or a law enforcement officer? It doesn't just have the uniform, but does have a gun. So that's a level of force, potential lethal force, or a complementary tool that reinforces against negative behaviors that might be taken by someone, because they have to do an assessment. Do I really want to take this to another level because I'm dealing with someone who's got another level of force multiplier, not just the suit, but they've also got a gun. Then you look at the badge. So there are a number of different identifiers that tell you what level of authority in leadership you're dealing with.
You were just talking about a couple of things. We're just diving in on this, and I can't help but wonder here. We're talking about firearms and uniforms and whatnot, and the power that comes with those force multipliers. Tell us some things that are just crucial and essential and could be dangerous. Like, let's say if there's a bad charactered person that possesses those force multipliers, like, what are some of the important principles of leadership that would help govern the use of those things?
Well, number one, the position you hold in a company, without being a law enforcement officer or national security, just you say I'm average Joe at my job, but I have a position as a supervisor of authority. That positional authority you have as a supervisor in that job can actually put pressure on someone. It can actually create an environment where that person is dealing with an extra level of stress because your position is a weapon of war, or it's a position of leadership that exemplifies direction and vision. And so positions can be weaponized. Positions can be weaponized. A position can be used as a weapon. So when you're involved in leadership, you have people who literally have physical force multipliers. There are weapons, like physical weapons, guns, knives, whatever. But then you also have words as weapons. Because how many of us have ever dealt with a boss or an authority figure in a job vocation that didn't realize that inherent in that vocation, inherent in that position itself, came a force magnification to my life, a force amplifier, an impact multiplier. If another lateral, somewhere at the same level of the job as I am, a lateral authority says something, a lateral person, they're not over me, I'm not over them, well, it doesn't have as much weight because that's just Joe who works in that area of the company. But when a leader says it, that's force amplification, force multiplication, the impact of those words now from that position in the company over me, vertical authority, that now has a greater weight, and I may carry those words through the week, and some people carry those words for years. Through life, they carry those words impacted by what a boss said. And there are people that are going to hear this, that are listening right now, that can think of someone that's a former boss or a present boss who said something, and those words have not stopped ringing out from the day they said it. Well, anyone else could have said those words, it wouldn't have bothered you much, but because they said it. Now,
same thing with the spouse, because we're the closest to our spouses. And when a friend or maybe someone that we don't know, they might say something that bothers them, but when a spouse does, it really cuts. And I'm thinking about the words of Christ when he spoke and when he talked to others, his disciples, or even the public. The things that he was saying was edifying and loving and maybe not comfortable, but it was because he wanted to edify the body, because he wanted to love those folks into the kingdom. And sometimes I think that maybe bosses or spouses might love those people, but they may not speak loving, because maybe they're doing it out of emotion or a heightened issue that they haven't governed their lips.
Right. So you have different guard positions. So if I was going to conceptualize what you're saying, it has to do with a guard position. Why would the words of a boss, why would they be so discomforting and potentially threatening to me? Well, it may have to do literally with my flight or fight instincts. It may have to do with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. self-preservation. The highest law of nature, first law of nature actually, self-preservation. No one wants to die. You know, everyone wants to go to heaven.
Those words are killing me.
Everyone wants to go to heaven, but no one wants to die, right?
That's right.
So a boss, if you feel like there's a threat to your longevity in that occupation and longevity in that job, or your income that's going to affect your life, so now there's instinctively a response that says, is this person's position favorable towards a positive outcome or a negative outcome in my life? What is happening here? So there's a piercing of our psychological framework when we allow someone to have that level of influence in our life where we feel like they can destroy my life, they can make my life or break my life. This person can make my life or break my life. And to your point, transfer that to a husband or wife. Well, a spouse is someone that you've let beyond your guard. You've let down your heart walls and you let them inside. So the words they speak are from the inside, internal sanctum and chambers of the heart that you haven't allowed other people's words to pierce or to exist and live. So you're going to ruminate and then think about words that are negative more than you're going to think about the words that are positive, because that's the nature of humans. They tend to think many times, 75% or more negatively than they do positively when something negative occurs. So those words actually have greater weight as force multiplication because of the role that person plays in our life. So we tend to keep people outside of our guard. And so we have a closed spirit with certain people where they're going to get social conversation. That's all. But then we have an open spirit with those that we learn to love and we've come to trust and we've come to value and desire their place in our lives. Now I open my spirit to them. Once I open my heart, my spirit, they are inside my heart and we kind of wrap ourselves around that person. Well, from this place inside my guard, greater damage can be done inside the heart than from a place outside the heart because I'm less guarded.
Right.
And then when someone begins to damage our heart from the inside because they don't understand that their words are leading to an emotional state. And so we begin to harden our heart and we start having a closed spirit, closing the ones we love. We start closing them out. If we feel like they're a threat, again, back to the first law of nature, they're a threat to my emotional life, my psychological life, my spiritual life, my financial life. They are a threat. Now I'm operating in a closed way towards people that were on the inside because on some level I feel like my emotional health cannot survive their lack of understanding about the place of influence I've given them in my life. And that's when counselors and the need for counselors, because somewhere someone may not understand their generational responsibility or family responsibility or generational lead responsibility to the family or our home.
So you're underscoring the effects of what poor leadership could inflict upon an unassuming victim there. So what are some good ways or some characteristics of a good leader, and what behaviors do they possess as an example that they could practice instead of those negative ones that we were just talking about?
Well, I pour everything through the matrix. I have a matrix, a formula, and I ask myself, is it pure? Is what you're going to say, is it pure? Is it positive? Is it powerful? Is what you're going to say to your spouse, your children, is it pure? Is it positive? Is it powerful? The Bible says if there is anything, if there be any virtue, if there's any love, anything good, things that are praiseworthy, think on these things.
You're bringing me to Philippians 4:8.
Yeah, think on these things.
That's right.
So if I'm going to address a negative, at something that is a negative behavior, then I want to make sure that I can identify at least 2 or 3 positives to couch the negative inside of. In other words, I say, hey, listen, I want to address this, but I understand that you're hitting on all 8 cylinders. You're hitting
You're
this, and
being
this.
empathetic.
Right. And so you're addressing the positive things, but but there is something that, I'm concerned about that I personally would like to address. And that's where you might address what you feel like is unacceptable or negative behavior. But one of the things we found is that sometimes if you don't follow up with an affirmation after a negative assertion, if you don't follow up with an affirmation after a negative assertion, sometimes the soul becomes overwhelmed and you get depressed. And I can't ever do anything right. I can't ever please anyone. And that may take some people back to childhood where they had they had the consequences and they had the negative assertions about their behavior, and they interpreted that as a rejection of their person, of a rejection. And so when we're force multipliers in one another's life, by virtue of our position as a husband, your position as someone as a wife in a situation, you have to realize that with your children, with your spouse, you hold this force multiplication position. So it's important how we communicate things forward. So I would say that number one, I would run my character through the 3 Ps: pure, positive, powerful. The way I behaved just then, was it pure? Was it positive? Was it powerful? If not, I may need to repent. I may need to ask forgiveness. Let's say I'm going to run now my conversation. I run my character through the 3 Ps. Now I'm going to run my conversation through the 3 Ps. Was what I just said, was it redemptive? And if I had to address something negative that needed to be redeemed, was it used redemptively? Was there a light at the end of that?
Not just a smackdown, but redeeming.
Right. And then the commitment to be part of that process of reconciliation. What I've noticed doing marriage counseling for many years is that the Bible speaks about ministers of reconciliation. Well, whoever's not looking for reconciliation in the conversation can reveal by default who's not able to get past their hurt, who's not able to get past their bitterness, and where the open door is still at. So if both individuals can honestly use the metric or measuring line of the 3 Cs and run it through the 3 Ps: character, conduct, conversation. I'm going to look at my character, my conduct, and the character is your overall way you handle things. Your character is a mean spirit, a happy spirit, a joyous spirit. Mm-hmm. And when someone leaves my presence, are they more edified and built up, encouraged and feel stronger? Or when they leave my presence, do they feel more depressed? Do they feel more down? Did I address more positive things or more negative things, right? And so the character is who you are. Your conduct is your behavior, and then your conversation. So I'm going to run my character, conduct, and conversation through pure, positive, and powerful. And I'm going to ask myself about each one of those 3 Cs, did I apply the 3 Ps? And so when I do that and do it honestly, and then I can look in that mirror and give a real assessment from a biblical framework and be open to someone saying, hey, I know what you think that was accomplishing, but actually this is the way it made me feel. And I want to be open to that because the idea is to have a bridge, not a barrier. If I really, in my heart, want a bridge built, then I'm going to be open to hearing how you feel about what I said, what I did, my behavior, my attitude, or even tone inflections. I'm going to be open for that.
Yeah, so your intent through your character there is really what telegraphs the message.
Yeah,
that you're speaking.
And if my intent is exposed, if I'm not willing to have feedback from the other person on whatever I did, but if I'm still justifying what I did, justifying what I said, and I'm still blaming you for my response, the reason I did that, raised my voice, is because you raised your voice. The reason, now you're justifying unacceptable behavior. Each person is responsible for their part in it. And I get that principle for leaders and anyone who has a place of preeminence, prominence, or visibility in a family or in a job vocationally. I get that principle from the Word of God. Mm-hmm. God speaks to the prophet Ezekiel, and he says, my people, they have a proverb. I don't want them to use this proverb anymore in Israel. You go tell my people, thus saith the Lord, I don't want you to say this ever again. The people are saying, the fathers have eaten the sour grapes. And when you eat sour grapes, it kind of gives a gritty, a gritty type feel in your mouth. The proverb was the fathers have eaten the sour grapes, but the children's teeth are set on edge. So the fathers ate the grapes, and it's causing the children to have problems gritting their teeth, right? The children's teeth are set on edge. In other words, I have this problem in my life because of what my father did, what my mother did. And so they're
That chip on their shoulder.
yeah, and they're justifying a behavior. So instead of accepting behavior modification, they went into ownership of the problem, claimed the problems, and justified unacceptable behaviors. And God said, look, God doesn't argue the merit of the case. Okay, yeah, I know what your father did. I know they were out of balance. They were wrong. They were angry. They were alcoholic. I know what your parents did. I know I know all those things that created that in you, that made you what you are. I know what starved your heart and the desperate areas where your heart needed those things that create a whole heart, a whole healthy heart, instead of a deformed heart. So God doesn't argue the merits of it. He just simply says, look, you're not justified. Don't use that proverb anymore to justify unacceptable behavior. The fathers ate the sour grapes, therefore the children's teeth are set on edge. That's why I'm the way I am. Deal with it. He says, the soul of the Father, the soul of the Son, they all are mine. All souls are mine. And every soul will give an account for the sin that they commit. You won't give an account for your father's sin. Your father will not give an account for your sin. In the sight of God, he's going to deal with you about you.
Yeah, and how did you deal with that, my son?
Yeah. And that's all he wants. And we're kind of like that. Our children go to school, and one day they come home, and you say, well, why did you do that? Well, the teacher said, the teacher is not your parent. We appreciate, Miss Johnson, but she's not your parent. You do what we say. Well, why did you do that? Well, my friend said. And you go, your friend is not your parent. I am. So God is the same
Adam,
way.
why did you partake? It was because that woman that you gave me.
It's her fault that
Yeah.
I did. And then God goes to Eve, why did you? And she said, well, it was the serpent.
That's right.
Yeah, so each one of them were transferring guilt, transferring blame, and they were justifying their own sin. And God says, well, I spoke to you. What did I tell you? I'm your parent. And I think each of us has to accept responsibility for our leadership placement by God.
We're all leaders. We're all should be tending to our own area of responsibility, regardless of what everybody else may or may not be doing to us, for us, or whatever.
Absolutely. You are a generational lead. Someone's always looking, someone's always inspecting, and someone's always prospecting. They're looking to see, are you someone that I should follow? Are you someone I should follow your example? So you're a generational lead.
And that's in your home. If you're the leader in your home, then you have those folks looking up to you. You got your kids, and maybe it's your siblings or whatever, but whoever is leading that family, that is an area of your responsibility. So this isn't just for police officers or legislators or presidents. Everybody is leading somebody in their family or in their home at the small level, but at the upper levels, those are the ones that are more uniform type people. But everybody is a leader. We all have a responsibility. And just because we're having a bad day doesn't mean we get to treat other people poorly.
Absolutely. All of sin comes short of the glory of God. All of us have mistakes. All of us miss it.
Absolutely.
All of us needed a Savior who was hung up for our hang-ups. So all of us needed our Savior, Christ. And one of the things that the Lord did was in the book of Genesis, he speaks to Abraham's leadership. And he says, shall I tell Abraham the thing I'm about to do, seeing I'm making of him a great and mighty nation? And the Lord was on his way and it's a theophany. God manifest in the flesh as a theophany visited Abraham in the plains of Mamre. He's on his way to Sodom and Gomorrah with two angels. And God says, shall I tell Abraham what I'm about to do? Seeing I'm going to make of him a great and mighty nation, and he's going to lead his family according to the precepts, according to the teaching, according to what I've taught him. And they are going to do righteousness because of what he instills in them. So Abraham, is God's friend, was one of the greatest examples of a generational lead who accepted his responsibility to demonstrate how to walk with the Lord. And he led the generations of his family in how to do that. And he's a progenitor for us today who are blessed with faithful Abraham.
That's right. Well, man, we've been going on this. We could talk all day on some of these principles. I love it. But in the time that we have left, is there a message or anything on your heart related to leadership that you want to express to the folks listening or watching today? Or maybe there's some projects that you're working on that you want to get some visibility.
We've got our book that's on Amazon. It's called Understanding and Overcoming the Poverty Disease. And so I'd encourage everyone to read it. It explains, can poverty be a disease, a disease? Mm-hmm. And absolutely it can. It can have a genetic impact beyond anything financial. And we usually associate poverty with finances, but it goes way beyond that. So I would say get that book.
And you also have a leadership network. Yes. Where you are helping to train the future leaders of our country, or basically of our world. So tell us about that too.
So we have a ministers network, and what we do is we train individuals to accept their civil calling. So we're going to give you civil training for civil leadership, which is important. You may be the next generational David that God is taking from the fabric of society and his family, but he's going to make him a king. So in the kingship, there are believers who are called the political realms, not preaching realms. And so we give them the tools they need to go and take Christian worldview and penetrate those realms. So that's the network, Ministers Network.
Yeah, and my wife and I, we're part of that network, and the teachings on there, they're fascinating. They're a lot along the lines of what we've been talking about here. Mm-hmm. And so if you have an interest in that or fascinated like I am, please check them out. What's
Ministers
the website
Network.
Where they could go?
Yeah, so it's the Ministers Network, and look up Howard Hatcher, Dr. Howard Hatcher, the Ministers Network, and you'll find it on the web. Also, Howard Hatcher School of Ministry, we've got links there. We do training for people's calling. So if someone's called to the prophetic or called to any of the presbytery, fivefold, whatever that is, we give specific training for how to enter more specifically and directly into your branch of spiritual employment and vocation. And then we have another book coming out called Trump 45 and the Black Men Parallel. Trump 45 and the Black Men Parallel. And it's coming out in about 3 weeks, so please go to Amazon and look for it.
Timely release.
Yeah, I dive into explaining lawfare, judicial malfeasance, and understanding how lawfare, judicial malfeasance, judicial malpractice, and all those different things, how they work, and we break that down on a very common level, and then we track it through history of the United States, and we show that we're not where we were as a nation. Even in race relations, we're doing better than we ever have. Got work to do, but we're doing better than we ever have. And so we've got that going on. And I would say, Jerry, to specifically just admonish everyone, just don't forsake the measure of impact that God has given you. Every one of you, God has given a measure of impact and a measure of influence. And I would encourage everyone to just maximize that measure of impact, that measure of influence, to be a generational lead, a paternal lead, a maternal lead, and just realize that the more responsible and faithful we are with that leadership, the more the Lord amplifies and multiplies the impact. And that's going to have effect for generations to come. Don't underestimate what God is able to do with a well-timed and well-placed word, just by virtue of your inherent power and inherent influence that's inside of your position.
Very well said. Dr. Hatcher, my friend, may God get all the glory for this podcast. And I just want to thank you for allowing me to come interview you today. and looking forward to our next session sometime in the future.
Hey, it was a lot of fun. Thanks,
Pleasure,
Sharon.
friend. Thank you.